The next speaker is Chris Bracher, Director of Neighbourhood, a company specialising in the provision of lifestyle and amenity solutions for new residential communities. Chris is tertiary trained in recreation management and has held a number of roles aligned with his professional passion for establishment and support of authentic communities. His experience includes engagement with local government, private master plan, residential developments and sports club contexts. His programming and strategic experience is complemented by his recent managerial involvement in the provision of green physical amenity solutions for greenfield and infield developments. He maintains an active association with the green industry through a My Neighbourhood engagement with the nursery and garden industry of Victoria. My Neighbourhood is also the community development manager with the soon-to-be-launched master plan project in Rockbank, Victoria. Foolishly, he plays veteran football and is an expert in injury rehabilitation as a result. Please welcome Chris.
Thanks for the introduction, Michael. Yeah, my company, My Neighbourhood, which has a great parallel with the work that Michael does, and we complement each other's businesses, arose from an involvement with various subsets of community. I was again back to the if I'm calling myself baby boom, you'll understand the chronology here that prior to municipal amalgamation out west, there was a little shire called the Shire of Buller. Became part of Hume in due course, and the Shire of Buller was at Sunbury, had two specific locations, Sunbury and Kerrigans, both obviously growth areas. I was the municipal recreation officer there, which was my first exposure to hands-on community development in a local government context. And boy, oh boy, what an observation to now sit 20 or maybe a little bit more years on and look back at places like Kerrigans and Sunbury to see how they've evolved. Much of what I see concerns me, and as I've progressed through it, particularly in the last few years working in that green space for a mob called Flemings Nurseries that many have heard of through their success in the Chelsea Flower Show in London. They have a landscaping division, and the whole amenity question and its impact upon lifestyle for people that live in those communities was something that we focused upon. But more and more we saw outcomes that disappointed us, and that has inspired me to continue on under my own steam doing with the My Neighbourhood stuff. But there's some really good examples around that balance the ledger. I love this expression, or the quotation here from the Melbourne Placemaking series in 2010, baking bread. There's a distinct difference between building an oven that bakes great bread and actually baking the bread. Having a great oven does not guarantee that great bread will be baked. Pretty simple, but touching on the point that Gary had made in his presentation just a few minutes ago, a development industry that's been built on hard infrastructure and compliance regimes has given us some really nice ovens, but the bread that's coming out of them is sometimes a little underdone from my experience. Pleased to see that the expansion of the brief, or the interpretation of the brief from groups like Quantum, that actually see that there's a broader role to play in developing the communities they service is it's really fantastic. Everyone will know the Kerrigans, I reckon. Probably Australia's most famous or infamous or noteworthy family. And most people will understand the context of the Kerrigans from the castle. Is anyone not familiar with the castle? Bloody un-Australian if you're not, so I'm glad to see that. So I'll put a couple of quotes in there. Around the theme poem is where the heart is. So Dale, who's the young guy, of course, that does Dad's bidding on the trading post transactions on the telephone, and he simply said here that the real estate, when he's describing Darryl, his dad's passion for the place, the real estate agent said location, 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 and we were right next to the airport. Most people would go, yeah, I can see the flip side of that. And of course, Farouk, the one famously, who went to court in his dinner suit. I dress him in the suit, Mr. Darrell. He says, plane fly overhead, drop value. I don't care, in Beirut, plane fly over, drop bomb. I like these planes. Yeah. The point I'd like to make out of the castle is that it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter how good that oven is that's been built for you, the bread that you can build, that you can bake from that is totally contextual. The Kerrigans live right next to that airport, and what's the overriding thing the observation that we make is that his family's identity is not defined by the shortcomings of their area, but by the brilliant sense of community with a disparate group of neighbours. And that's the opportunity that we all have, whether we've got a grand surround or something a little bit more modest. It's the essence of the Kerrigan's life. And can you recall the character that Bud Tingwell played, the barrister, QC, yeah, who famously I recall when he was talking about how proud he was of his son graduating from law school, and Darryl talked about his daughter, whose name escapes me, saying, I felt the same way when she got her Certificate 3 in hairdressing from Sunshine TAFE. It's all contextual. It's all contextual. Bud Tingwell recognised when he represented the Kerrigans and their case at the High Court that a just and fair society wouldn't take away these wonderful relationships that have existed around the Kerrigans' home. Community is a notion that's bandied around. Everyone will put a different spin on what it means. For me, community is the capacity for the prime stakeholders, and that is the residents, to meaningfully shape their destiny and that of the place they live through engagement in the physical, social and cultural fabric. And the critical thing is there an involvement, a capacity to be able to control your destiny. In new communities, again, so often we see a template-driven development that says, there you are, you've got the most shiny, wonderful facilities, and the afterthought is, what do we do to make these work? It can reflect itself in a real estate-driven process that has lots of face painting and street picnics, street parties. But when it comes to the crunch and the developer or the sales portion of that process is over, what are you left with? It's a skeleton. And it's a skeleton that needs to be driven by those that are within, who are the prime stakeholders, the residents from within. So I've said there, the physically shiniest of developments that apply as a commercial template without real engagement is less likely to become a resilient, sustainable, authentic community than one is less physically blessed, like the Kerrigans, but which engages and resources its residential stakeholders. So my presentation is really in that grey spectrum. So, you know, let's assume all the compliance stuff is looked after. I get the fun bit, you know, how we actually engage people. But more importantly, how do we define and measure what we're doing in terms of its worth? When a group of residents will say, well, I want my committee to do this, or my manager to do this. More astute and broad-based manager will say, well, actually, it's the outcome that I'm looking to drive, and these are the ways that we'll measure it. I don't know if that's difficult to read, but effectively, and Nicole just, you know, I know I've got a lawyer in the room who's well aware of the need to be acknowledging. I haven't acknowledged, I can't remember where it came from, but I reckon it's pretty good. The sense of place, you hear it a lot, placemaking, what does it mean? And placemaking is actually a notion that comes from a people first rather than a construction hard facilities first. It says, if we're going to build these facilities, what are the outcomes that we need to see, rather than saying we're putting that facility there and you build it, they will come. So the notion of place, the inner ring there is really defining what a solid sense of place includes. It's accessible, it's linked, it's comfortable, it has a variety of uses of activities, and importantly, it's sociable. People get on, people talk. The second ring talks about some of the secondary qualities that tie in with those major outcomes. And the outside dark blue area is some of the measurables. Now, again, when I've been bashing my head against the wall trying to get in and push a case with developers for some investment in the community, it's been how do we measure it, you know? And I've gone, well, how do you measure the billboard? How do you know in terms of sales, what's that bringing to you? But that's one of those traditional things that just happens. This sense of place utilises a measurement called social return on investment, SROI, which simply says that all of these things are equally valid in terms of determining the quality of the community and in turn the economic returns that will and uplift that will flow from it. So you've got crime statistics, you've got environmental data, pedestrian activity, traffic data, evening use, volunteerism is an important thing. All of these things that impact upon a notion of place and a sense of belonging. To that point, do people yearn for community interaction? Well, I say hell yeah. In recent decades, we've seen design responses that would actually say quite the contrary. And I once heard the type of buildings that we were designing in a urban fringe environment, perhaps 15, 20 years ago, that had facade, so garage, and this will be very familiar to a lot of you, garage with the as I come in and I go out, you don't have to see it as I come in, and on the other side they had what they call the, excuse the French, the piss off wall, which was, this is where my front door is, but I'm actually keeping the community at bay because this is my little haven. I think the presumption there was that people need their haven, but what was missed in it was that they also need a capacity to be able to circulate and find a sense of belonging in the broader community. So the premise I come from is, yes, they need a sense of community identity, it's yearned for, but importantly, one size doesn't fit all. So community reference point for the different subsets of your community will be different for each. Those people who have got small children, obviously it's a play group where they might gravitate to a particular ethnic group or have their own sense of community, which may in fact exist outside the place in which they live. There's numerous health indices at the moment which will say that community connectedness is related to levels of emotional and physical health. I was fortunate enough, a couple of months ago, a colleague of mine is the CEO of the City of Whittlesea, and the City of Whittlesea obviously has experienced enormous growth, being one of the development corridors of Melbourne. And I was sitting there patting him on the back saying how well he'd done and how things had progressed, and he said, yeah, but there's so much of what we're not proud of here, and that is we have ridiculously high crime rates, we have people taking 2 hours to get into the city, we have childhood obesity rates, mental health rates which are well above state averages. The spin-off of that is there's finally a move to actually resource it and say we know the downside of this, we know what doing it badly costs our community, and accordingly we're finally seeing some pushback from the public sector and the governance at a state level to say it's time to do things a little better. I'm fortunate now to be associated with a project in the west of Melbourne that's going to be launched in a couple of weeks. It's actually in the Rockbank sector, and it's a new PSP there. 7,000 home lot, which will sit from the Leaks Road area in Rockbank, anyone who knows, pushing back towards Burnside and Caroline Springs. And that'll be the first of the connections that links up Caroline Springs and Melton in due course. I say fortunate because this is a developer that up front has said we value community, we recognise that it's more than just a sales process. It's about getting people involved in their destiny from day one. So even prior to launch of the project, we are now engaging with local groups, RSLs, sports clubs and what have you, which is really, really pleasing. But importantly in that context, we've recognised that community isn't just contained within your area too. So if you're in a new estate, you know that you're also dependent upon areas outside of your boundaries for services, for transport connections for schools, and in time as your community develops, those communities outside yours will also be reciprocally dependent upon you. I heard we had some talk earlier with Gary about strategic planning, and you know what, from a down and dirty perspective, if you like, having been involved and continue to be involved in sporting clubs and community groups, I've had the experience often of going in with the corporate banter and talking about strategic plans, and I can see hell freezing over per go. This is boring me terribly. I think the important point that I would add to what Gary said is that it is important to have a plan. Now that plan might be one sheet of paper that everyone buys into, but it's actually the process that's important, not this wonderful monument that you've built to yourself that might sit on a shelf. Strategic planning in a community context helps you plan your destiny, gets you to understand the environment you're operating, and gives you a significant buy-in and motivation. But I defer to Committee Dynamics 101, which I call, which is keep it simple. People are reluctant to become involved in the governance of any organisation, far happier to be receivers of the service rather than contributors to it. And the best way to be countering that is to keep the participation level, hurdles, really, really low. It applies in sporting clubs, it applies in community groups, it applies in residential management. However, part and parcel of the privileged position that you guys are in is having a manager like Quantum who represents resource to you. Resource directly to the extent of their brief, but also a resource to key you in with the external resources that might be available through council and what have you, in terms of programming and support, seeding grants for establishment of programs and what have you. Just a little bit though on what a strategic plan might look like at an operational level for those in your circumstances. And this has been drawn just off the internet. Again, more plagiarism. Does that apply? Plagiarism applies off the internet, doesn't it, Nicole?
Verbalising the source, okay.
Yeah, good, okay, yeah. Source, internet. And it's actually a bit of a giveaway because if you look at point 2, it is the Flinders University that threw this one on. So the strategic planning mantra that goes through vision and mission and then objectives and key resolve areas, and then gets down to the strategic level, and this is where people in committees really engage, and they go, tell me exactly what you want me to do. Familiar refrain? Tell me what you want me to do, mate, I'll go and do it, but I don't have to think about it. So from a strategic level, there's a series of actions that obviously flow. In this case, they're talking about strategy undertaking a coordinated and targeted approach to affiliation with a junior club. So clearly it's a sporting context. Yada, yada, yada. What are the things we need to do? Actions, approach junior clubs, outline club commitments, yada, yada. What's missing is the 3 end columns here that I've put up. So you've got a strategy, you've got an actions. My experience is it's just you tell them who's doing it. Well, actually, you get agreement within as to who's doing it, because people can say, yeah, I've got some contacts, I've got some areas that I'm familiar with, I can do that. Set up a deadline and set a budget for them, and it's eminently measurable, because otherwise these things go on and on and on and on. Anyone that's been in a committee in any context will recognise that as a familiar scenario. I'm silly enough to be president of my veterans footy club that I play in. Presidency comes when you're not a very good player and you have to make a contribution in some sense. You know, I've found that we're a group that has people that are over 35 playing footy. Oldest players 70 years of age. Great engagement for people, and it's a real sense of community for me. I'm walking the walk in that sense. But I also recognise that if people get older, they say, you know, I don't really want to get involved in that. Can you make it as simple as possible? I've done all this stuff with my kids' soccer and my kids' cricket over the years. Just make it easy for me. This is the sort of tool that I've used to say, Joe Bloke, this is your job, you're right, and inevitably it takes a little bit of massaging behind the scenes, but you get there. I'm back to Daryl, the great Daryl. With that's akin to the look that he gave the opposition or the government, the Airports Commission when he was in the court. Remember, and they finally win it. He stands over whatever that word is. That's the one. The end of the court case, and says, "Bad luck." And everyone thinks, oh, he's doing the right thing. Bad luck. Yeah, dickheads. Remember it? Stuck in my brain. Daryl is the embodiment, as are his extended family and his community around him, of the small things count. Communication. We heard before about a buy-in to a process of actually getting a strategic plan, communicating it back to them. Some of the programming aspects, programming 101. If you do your surveys, you'll get some feedback as to what people want and what's available in the broader community. Council grant programs are an interesting one because, again, that addresses this issue of being responsive to a broader context rather than just your own estate. And we're not living in a bubble, so that's important. There's some generous schemes there. You may have to pitch yourself to other residences from outside, but that's the essence of a broader community life. And consistent with my opening stanza where I was talking about, I'm probably more a baby boomer than Gen X. Discovered this thing called, does anyone know meetup.com? Sounds like an RSV. Look at you guys particularly, because you'd be right into that cyber world. That's applying a generality that equally applies to me. Meetup.com is one of the few vehicles in the cyber world that actually gets people in a organised manner to aggregate. That is to say, rather than being the end, rather than the cyber connection being the end, the actual physical connection, and I'm not talking in an intimate physical sense, but the group connection that flows from it is the end. People are able to get on there, register a particular interest group. Say I'm in Springthorpe and I'm doing the Maltese Monopoly Club, and get interest in involvement in that type of group within that area. So there's enormous opportunity via that vehicle, which is obviously consistent with the primary mode of communication for many these days, to actually feed into a process that's more productive for your community in the whole. But that's the extent of my cyber knowledge. I just think there must be a number of other vehicles like that that properly tapped can be of enormous use to you. That's about it for me. Short and sweet, I say, operating in the grey spectrum. But mine is experience-based principally, and seeing how people operate and relate to each other, and also framed up by a country town background that I have, where I've delighted in the community involvement. Equally, seen the downside of that too, and we recognise that we try and put a country town ethos overlaid onto a new committee. There's a different dynamic, but it's not a bad aspiration for a start, I reckon. Anyway, thank you. We've got time for questions if there's any, Michael.